Hi guys, my name is Tristan and I'll be your MC for this event. I'm a student here at Cal Poly Pomona, and I'm also part of Crew, a Christian club here on campus that is running this event. And I'm so excited for Stump the Professor, which is your opportunity to ask non-trivial questions about the Bible or God to a university professor from Biola. We'll have a mic, this mic will be over there. We'll have it to the side. And you can line up and ask any questions that you have. And John, our professor, will answer them. And this event will officially be running from 12 to 1. And at 1, we're going to have to turn the mic off just to respect classes and stuff. But if you guys have any more questions, feel free to stick around. And John will be here for a little bit more, and he'll answer any of your questions. If you look to the back there, there's a banner. The first one, it says Stump the Professor. And if you guys have need to go to class, if time runs out, and if you don't want to go up and ask your questions on the mic, we definitely love to hear your questions. So if you want to text Stump the Professor, that's one word, Stump the Professor, to 85005. Go ahead and text that, and you'll get just fill out a quick survey, and then send your questions, and one of our students will get back to you. Also, if you want to know more information about Cal Poly Crew, just about weekly meetings, Bible studies, just events, text more info crew to 85005. Again, that's more info crew at 85005, and someone from Crew will follow up with you. Just to introduce our professor, I'm seriously excited for Jon Rittenhouse, who's here with us today. He is currently a professor at Biola University. He got his degree in chemical engineering and has 4 graduate degrees, one being in philosophy. He has spoken at over 100 universities here in the U.S. and multiple universities in Europe and other countries. And he's answered questions about the Bible, God, and other stuff about Christianity for the past 25 years. So this is your opportunity to ask questions today. So give it up for Jon Rittenhouse.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming out. It's interesting to be able to answer questions. I tell people I can always answer any question you ask me, but sometimes the answer I may have to say is, I don't know. I was at State University of New York at Buffalo, and I was speaking on a different topic. I forget what the topic was. But one of the students in the audience kind of got amped up at me a little bit. He was a little bit ticked off, and he was kind of waiting to kind of ask questions. He was interrupting, and at one point I said, just wait until Q&A time. Then, if you don't agree, that's okay. We'll do Q&A, and it's fine. And so we got to Q&A time, and this guy, Dan, I always ask people, say, please tell me your first name, because I want to get to know you, and that's true. And so Q&A time got there. He raised his hand, and he was really, really amped up. And he says, John, you can't make statements about truth. I said, are you sure? And he said, yes. I said, are you absolutely sure? He says, yes. I said, Dan, you just made a statement about truth. He looks at me, and his jaw drops, and he's like, you're right. I said, I know. You can make statements about truth. Truth does exist. I was in my oldest daughter's high school class a couple of years ago. She's now a student at UCLA. But I came in to speak. The professor said, you can have your mom or dad come in and speak about what they do. So I came in and I talked about truth and me teaching philosophy class. And I asked the students early on in the statement, I said, let me see a show of hands. I said, how many of you have ever been lied to? And all the hands went up. And I said to the class, I said, that proves that truth exists. And none of them got it. They're all like totally clueless. They kind of look like the deer in the headlights kind of stare, kind of like, what are you talking about? And one brave girl in the class raises her hand. I call on her, and she's like, what do you mean by that? I said, well, a lie is a departure from something. A lie is the departure from the truth. Since lies exist, truth has to exist. Now, maybe it's difficult to know what the truth is. We have all kinds of competing opinions in our culture today about every particular topic imaginable of a man. But simply because it's difficult to know truth doesn't mean that truth does not exist. I was speaking at the University of Latvia in Riga, Latvia, a very beautiful city. And I did a lecture on an unrelated topic to today. And I told people in the audience, I said, if you want some time one-on-one with me tomorrow, please sign up on my schedule. And so I had a couple professors. One was a math professor that signed up on my sheet. I got together with him the next day in the cafeteria, and we began to talk about relevant issues like the existence of God. And he says, I'm not sure that I believe in God. I said, you really should. And he's like, why? I said, because the very fact that absolutes exist, absolutes in morality, absolutes in mathematics, absolutes in chemistry, the very fact that absolutes exist demonstrate that there's got to be an ultimate absolute. And that ultimate absolute, I believe, is in fact God. And so he challenged me in a friendly way about absolutes. And so I took out a piece of paper, and I wrote on the paper, 2 plus 2 equals, and I put a blank with a question mark. And I said, what's the answer to that question? He said, well, 4. I said, how many answers are there to that question? How many right answers are there? He said, only 1. I said, how many wrong answers? And he said, endless, infinite number of answers. And I said, that shows that there's absolute truth. And if there's a right answer for this question, why is there not right answers to other questions in life, more substantial questions to life? And he looks at me and he says, well, those are just symbols on a piece of paper. And I said, yes, you are right, they are just symbols, but those symbols represent objective reality. And he looks at me and says, you're right, they do, they are. Numbers are real, they do exist. When I was at a university in Ohio, I used that illustration about 2 plus 2, and I got into a lot of trouble with math majors. And so actually when I use that illustration, a lot of times I'll have to clarify it in this way and say, what is 2 base 10 plus 2 base 10 expressed in a whole number integer base 10? Because if I don't say that, some math major is going to get after me and say, hey, there's lots of answers to that question, unless you frame it very specifically. And so usually when I'm in a free speech type of audience like this, I'll usually frame it that way, 2 base 10 plus 2 base 10. About 6 years ago, I was here more frequently than 6 years ago, but 6 years ago I did a debate with an atheist from the Free Inquiry Society. And the debate was on the existence of God. The guy's name was DJ Grothus, and his debate was based upon 2 premises, 2 major things that he said that he questioned the existence of God. He said, if you can't see it, it's not real. And there's not enough empirical evidence to support the notion or the conclusion that God actually exists. And when he said that, I was actually pretty fired up because I thought this is going to be a very easy debate. And so, but I had to wait until cross-examine time where I got to ask him questions, he gets to ask me questions, and we get to dialogue. And on the point that he said, if you can't see it, it's not real, I said, DJ, do you love your mother? He's like, well, yeah, I love my mother. It's not as safe to say, do you love your father? You might get a 50-50 on that. But if you say, do you love your mother, it's almost 100% on that one. So I said, do you love your mother? And he's like, well, yeah, of course I love my mother. I said, what color is love? How much does it weigh? Could you give me a quart of it tomorrow? Because, you know, if you can't see it, it's not real, is it? You can't see love. Can't see numbers. Can't see gravity. Can't see the wind. Can't see logical statements. Can't see propositions. Can't see relations. All of those things are real, but you can't see them because none of those are physical objects except for wind, but still you can't visually see it. And he backed off of his statement about if you can't see it, it's not real. He's like, well, yeah, it's real. Love is real, but yeah, I can't see it, but I see the effects of it. And I said, your argument just failed. Your argument, your major premise just failed. Simply because I can't see something doesn't mean that it's not real. And then his comment, there's not enough empirical evidence. Anthony Flew, up until recently, was one of the best-known atheists in the 20th century. Many of my friends that have PhDs in philosophy and teach at various universities around the country have said when they were doing their PhD program or their master's program in philosophy, you always had to read Anthony Flew because Anthony Flew, all roads led through him and his objections against God, his atheistic articles and arguments. You had to read it. You had to deal with him. You had to get serious about what he said. And Anthony Flew, about 4 years ago, actually gave up his atheism and became a deist. He said, the evidence is in. The evidence is so significant, I can no longer maintain my atheism. I am willing to give up my atheism, and I now acknowledge that God does exist. Now, he's not a Christian, and he says, don't get your hopes up that I'm ever going to become a Christian. But he said, I do believe that God does exist, but he's more of a deist than a theist in his worldview. What convinced him? One of the things that convinced him was cosmology. Things that have beginnings have causes. Things that have beginnings have causes. I work a lot with mainland Chinese students in San Bernardino. I was interacting with one of my Chinese students one day, and I showed him my cell phone. I said, Wei, where did this cell phone come from? And he looked at it and he said, well, somebody made it. And I kind of challenged him a little bit. I said, how do you know that? Did you watch them? Were you there at the assembly line? Did you actually see them visually with your eyes put this together? How do you know somebody built this? How do you know somebody made it? And he looks at me, he smiles, we're good friends, and he looks at me, he says, looks at me, he says, common sense, John. And then I take my digital camera out of my book bag and I say, where did this come from? He said, somebody made it. And I challenged him again. I said, how do you know? Did you see him fabricate it? Did you see him put it together? Were you there? How do you know somebody made it? He looks at me, he says, common sense, John. And then we're sitting in the car and I say, where did this car come from? And he says, well, somebody made it. I said, how do you know? And I challenged him again. Did the same thing with the apartment complex that he came out of. I said, where did that apartment complex come from? And he looks at me and says, somebody made it. I said, were you there? Did you exist? Were you alive? Did you observe them do that? How do you know that? And he looks at me and says, common sense, John. And so then I said to him, as my final point, I said, the universe had a beginning. Where did the universe come from? And he says, I don't know. I looked at him, I said, somebody made it. I said, common sense, Wei. Common sense. If somebody made a cell phone, somebody made a digital camera, somebody made a laptop, somebody made a student center building that had a beginning, somebody made this universe. This universe reflects design. This universe reflects beauty. This universe reflects order. Tons of things. It reflects a person made it. The student union reflects intelligence and design and beauty and choice, capable of choice. Now, when I was at Stephen F. Austin University a number of years ago, I was actually speaking on the topic of witchcraft. It's not my favorite topic, but I was actually speaking on the occult, doorway to the supernatural, or dangerous dabblings. And I've done this lecture all over the country, not so much recently. The interest in it has died out. But at Stephen F. Austin, Crew there, the organization of Crew, had scheduled me about 9 months before I was actually going to come. So this was way advanced plan. But when I got there, unknown to me, the local witchcraft group on campus had asked to become a student organization, and they were having lots of problems getting recognized as a student club on campus. And so, they thought that Campus Crusade had done this lecture on witchcraft kind of to stick it in their face, which wasn't true at all. And so when I came, they were kind of a little bit miffed at me, the witches were, and they were kind of thought that I was just there to kind of criticize them, and I really wasn't. And so during the Q&A time, they kind of got in my face a little bit, and I understand, it's very understandable. And they said, well, John, what do you think? What do you think about the witches here on campus becoming a student club? And I said, I totally support your right to become a student club. I said, you ought to be able to be recognized as a student club. Just because your views don't agree with mine, that's immaterial. I said, you ought to be able to organize and be a student club. And they were shocked that I would say that. And that kind of settled down the audience. So I'm very much believe in freedom in the sense of you should have the freedom to believe whatever you want to believe. But simply because I have the freedom to believe whatever I want doesn't mean that what I believe is actually or necessarily the truth. I think it was 3 years ago, it might have been 4, but 3 or 4 years ago, I did another debate here on campus with a Muslim scholar by the name of Jamal Badawi. And our topic was, it's actually on YouTube, so if you want to listen to the debate, you can. You can Google Cal Poly Pomona. Do you know where, you familiar with that term, Cal Poly Pomona? So you Google Cal Poly Pomona debate and it'll come up on YouTube. But our debate topic was Jesus, God, or God or prophet. And so we discussed that for a period of time. We had question and answer time. And one of my points during that dialogue debate time was this. I asked Jamal, I said, Jamal, who knows more about your mother? You or me? And he kind of smiled, he looked at me, he's like, well, John, I do. said, well, why? Why do you know more about your mother than I do? He's like, well, John, you've never met my mother. I've lived my whole life with my mother. So Jamal Badawi is a better judge of things about his mother because he's spent a lot of time with her his whole lifetime. And I haven't even met her. So who's a better judge of the identity of Jesus? 12 men that spent 3 solid years with Jesus, 24 hours a day, and saw him under every situation imaginable to man. Or somebody 600 years that lived 600 years after Jesus lived, died, and came back to life. Who's a better judge of the identity and character of Jesus? Somebody that never met him, or 12 men that spent 24 hours a day for 3 solid years with Jesus? When I ask my Muslim friends that question, they don't like to give me an answer because the answer is obvious. I'm going to take the opinions and observations and conclusions of those 12 disciples who wrote the New Testament more than I'm going to take the opinion of somebody 600 years removed from the life of Christ. People of every religious background say that they acknowledge the greatness, the moral integrity of Jesus. Some want to say that Jesus is simply a good moral teacher or a prophet or a wise man. C.S. Lewis in his book Mere Christianity says that's one thing that we must never say about Jesus, being simply a good moral man. If Jesus were a good moral man, he would be telling the truth. But Jesus claimed to be the God of the universe. And if he's not the God of the universe, that's not good moral truth. Telling people you have to have a relationship with yourself, Jesus, in order to have a right relationship with God and have the chance of eternal life, knowing that that's not true, that's not being a good moral teacher. Jesus clearly claimed to be God. Now, it's possible that he's not. It's possible that he's a big fat liar. But you know, guys, a little tidbit for you for your future marriage. You know, when you get married and, you know, your wife has a couple of kids and, you know, maybe she puts on 1 or 2 pounds, you know, because of childbearing and stuff, and she comes to you and she buys a new dress down at Macy's or Kohl's, and she comes to you and she says, sweetheart, do you think this dress makes me look fat? Guys, preserve your marriage, lie to her. Sweetheart, no, it doesn't. Doesn't make you look, you're gorgeous, sweetheart. But lying to your wife about whether or not the dress makes her fat, that's a tiny, tiny, tiny lie. But if you're just a human individual and you claim to be the God of the universe, that's a whopper of a lie. And also highly dishonest. Jesus would be a hypocrite because he told people not to tell lies. Jesus would be an incredibly evil because he knew full well he could not deliver on the goods when he said he could bring forgiveness to humankind. Jesus would be a fool for dying for what he knew to be a lie. But Jesus could have been mistaken. He could have been seriously thinking that he really was God, but he's just deluded. He's crazy and out of his stinking mind. As C.S. Lewis says, he'd be on the level of a man who claims to be a poached egg. Or as Peter Kreeft, a philosopher from Boston College, says, if I claim to be the smartest and best philosopher in America, he said, I'm simply arrogant and a fool. If I claim to be Napoleon Bonaparte, then I'm probably on the edge of sanity and insanity. But if I claim to be a butterfly, I have left the sunny shores of sanity and I've dropped over the cliff in a major way. But if me as just a human individual claim to be the God of the universe, he says that gap is so great, my insanity is beyond comprehension. If I claim to be a butterfly, you'd think I'm joking with you. You'd wait for the punchline. But if I really believe that, you'd say, man, you are insane in a major way, John. What kind of drugs are you doing lately? But if I'm just a man and I claim to be the God of the universe that created the entire universe, that holds the destiny of all mankind, and I'm just a man, the gap there is so wildly crazy. Jesus Christ claimed to be God. And he backed it up by the life that he lived, the miracles that he lived, and par excellence, he said, I'm going to prove it by my resurrection from the grave. He said, if you kill me, I'm going to raise this temple up in 3 days. And he was speaking about his body, not the physical Jewish temple. Simon Greenleaf was Dane Professor of Law at Harvard University in 1846. He was not a Christian. In fact, he was kind of antagonistic towards Christianity. It's hard to believe that objective, open-minded professors at secular universities would be antagonistic towards Christianity. Isn't that difficult to believe, men and women? Isn't that hard to believe, that a professor would actually be antagonist? I'm joking. I'm being sarcastic. Simon Greenleaf criticized Christianity in his classroom. After class one day, 2 of his students came to him and said, "Professor, we want you to examine the evidence." Greenleaf had written 2 major textbooks on legal evidence. How to examine written or oral testimony to make sure that testimony should be allowed in the courtroom as evidence or thrown out because it wasn't credible or fabricated or conspiracy or inconsistent. 2 major textbooks. There's a school up in the north, there's a school in San Diego called Simon Greenleaf School of Law. We still use his stuff today in our law schools. So he took up their challenge. He examined 4 men's written testimonies, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, to see whether or not they fabricated things, there was a conspiracy, if there was inconsistencies. He went through their testimony with a fine-tooth comb. And after he researched their testimony, he came to the conclusion that if the resurrection wasn't true, there was no possible motive for its fabrication. Greenleaf went on to commit his life to Jesus Christ and wrote a 454-page book about the legal historical evidence for the resurrection. We're going to move to questions. I have millions of more stories for you. Why don't you hold on to that? Let's see if one of these, don't let them have the mic. Oh, yeah, good. So if you have questions. Come on up. You got questions? Or you can yell them out. Who's got a question? Give me your first name. Give me a question. I'll pay you. I'll pay you for a question. I'll pay you $5. Well, let's see if it's a good question. If it's a bad question, he's got to pay me.
Do I have to say my name? No. Okay. Well, with your logic saying that who made it, I guess, right? That logic? Yeah. Can you say that who made God with that logic you're saying? What makes you so sure that he's the top?
It's a good question, but what I said in my analogy with the cell phone or the universe was this. Things, and they made this comment, a deductive argument. Things that have beginnings have causes. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe has to have a cause. But God doesn't have a beginning, therefore he doesn't have a cause. Not only does he not have a cause, he need not have a cause because he's eternal. So the logic actually maintains, although your question is a good one, and I get it all the time, because people think that they've caught me in kind of a fallacy, a logical fallacy, but it's not, because God doesn't have a beginning. Okay? You might have to shout. That's correct. God never began. God always existed. No, he doesn't have to start existence in order to have existence. God is eternal. So his question was, how can God not have a beginning? How can God not have a beginning? 2 pieces of evidence: philosophy, theology. Theology. Exodus chapter 3. Moses confronts, or really God confronts Moses. God shows up on the scene, appears as a burning bush. Or the bush is on fire, but it's not consumed. And God is manifesting his presence in that bush to Moses. And Moses says, he figures out that it's God because, bushes don't just start on fire, stay on fire, and don't get consumed. So he knows something's going down. And God speaks to him. And God says, take off your shoes. This is holy ground. It's holy ground because God is there. And Moses wants to figure out who this God is. Well, the general term in the culture is El, E-L. It's related to a distant language, Arabic, which is the name for God is Allah. Well, it's a same cognitive root, even though it's a distant language. So Moses knows this term, Elohim or El. Well, I know your title, Elohim, but what's your name? And God says in response of his name, he says Haya. It's a Hebrew word. It's a to-be verb. I is. And it gets translated, I am. And literally what it is the idea of a causeless cause, the self-existent one. So that's a point from theology. Now a point from philosophy. There's two types of categories in the area of metaphysics. Metaphysics is a study of what exists. Grass exists, people exist, buildings exist, numbers exist, trees exist. So there's two different categories in metaphysics, contingent and necessary. Contingent means the thing in question, its existence is dependent on somebody else. I play this game with my students at bio. I say, where'd you come from? I don't mean geographically. How'd you come to exist? They say, my parents. I say, where'd your parents come from? Well, their parents. Where did their parents come from? Well, their parents. Where did their parents come from? Their parents. And they get tired of me after I do it about 5 times. They're like, hey, okay, prof, okay, finish up, And so you have to have a necessary being upon which the contingent beings owe its existence. Otherwise, you get an infinite regress. So if God owed his existence to somebody else, then we'd have to say, well, where did that God come from? Well, another God. Where did that God come from? Another God, another God, another God, another God, another God. And it's an infinite regress. So you have to, by philosophical necessity, have a necessary being. A being that not only does exist, but a being that does not owe its existence to anything else. So from philosophy, we get a great argument that God is eternal, doesn't have a beginning. And we get that in Revelation from the Bible that God says this about himself. Okay? Another question. Maybe you might come up. Come on up if you would. Come on up. First name and question.
First name's Ozzy, and my question is, why one God?
Great question. Ozzy said, why one God? 2 reasons. I'm going to invoke science and theology here. Science, there's a scientific principle called Occam's razor. Occam's razor says that you propose the simplest theory to explain the data. So there's an argument that I love using. It's I mentioned a little bit of it before, the Kalam cosmological argument. The universe exists. The universe either had a beginning or it didn't have a beginning. The universe had a beginning. Since it had a beginning, it was either caused or not caused. It definitely was caused. Things that have beginnings that have causes. If it was caused, there's 2 types of causation known to science. Event-event causation or agent causation. There are no events prior to the Big Bang event. So an event could not have caused the Big Bang. Therefore, if it's not event-event causation, it had to be agent causation, had to be a personal agent. What can we tell about this personal agent from science and philosophy? Has to be powerful, intelligent, capable of choice, causeless, non-material because it existed prior to the universe, timeless, and spaceless. So that argument gets us largely to theism. It doesn't say which theism. There's 3 theistic religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity. And people, a lot of times when I use that argument, as Ozzy did, great question, he said, why just one God? Well, because it's the simplest possible theory to explain the data. And if the simplest theory explains the data, let's stay with that theory unless we need more explanation. And that's what we find in the 3 major religions of the world. Judaism, Islam, Christianity all say that there is only one God. They're all monotheistic religions. Somebody else had a question. First name.
Hello.
Kind of loud.
My name is Susan, and I wanted to comment on when you were talking about Jesus and how if he were to claim he were God, and that would be a big lie, if it was a big lie, if it was false, then that would make him a hypocrite. But I'm Muslim, and we believe in Jesus, and we don't say he's just a prophet. He's a prophet, one of our most respected prophets. And when you would say, who knows someone more, the person who has a direct connection or 600 years over? Well, these texts that the students wrote, over time, they were translated and changed and rewritten and retold, and information can get lost that way. So the people today, I think the Christians who would say that Jesus said he was God, know just about as much of what he said as we do, as the Muslims do, because there's not a direct connection with any of us between all the translations that have been happening. So it is a Muslim's belief that Jesus never claimed he was God, that he said he was a prophet, is not a hypocrite, and is a greatly respected man. So this is more of a comment.
Yeah. Could I ask you a question? You don't have to answer it, but could I ask you a question?
Perhaps. I'm not good at these things.
Okay. This one will be a simple one. Is God all-powerful?
Yes.
will God ever allow his holy book to be corrupted?
Books are translated and rewritten and changed, and sometimes
The Quran is now 1,400 years old, the Quran is. Would God ever allow the Quran to be corrupted?
we have a saying that someday the Quran will be lost from all the hearts of Muslims, and there won't be any knowledge of it anymore. And as what's happened to the last books, the Torah and the Bible, people will have misinterpretations and misinformation on it.
I was doing some shopping with one of my Chinese friends. We're going to different dealerships and testing out cars. And one of the dealerships, the guy that was the salesman, I thought he was from India. I asked him, I said, "Are you from India?" He said, "No, I'm from Pakistan." I said, "So you're Muslim?" He says, "Yes." I said, "Is God all-powerful?" He's like, "Yes." "Is God just?" "Yes." "Is God good?" "Yes." "Is God creator?" "Yes." I knew I'd get yeses to those questions. So then I asked him, I said, "Would God ever allow his holy book to be corrupted?" Now, he was thinking I was thinking about the Quran, which is totally fine. And he says, "God will never allow his holy book to be corrupted." I said, "So is the New Testament corrupted?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Is God all-powerful?" He's like, "Yes." "Will God ever allow his holy book to be corrupted?" And he wouldn't give me an answer. Because Muslims do believe fairly strongly that God would never allow his holy book to be corrupted. Only in the last 30 years has Muslims changed their opinion about the New Testament. Prior to 30 years ago, Muslims would say that the New Testament is not corrupted because God would never allow his holy books to be corrupted. Their opinion has changed in the last 30 years. I take issue with that, not in an aggressive or abrasive way, but disagreement, in a gentle way that I disagree. I was at Kansas State University, and this relates to the topic, but I'm going to tell you a story. And Q&A time, a girl stood up. She was probably in her 50s. She said, "Well, I'm not a student. My name is Deb. I don't have a question, but I have a comment." She said, "The New Testament is unreliable. It's been translated so many times. There's no manuscript evidence." She went on for about 3 minutes and criticized. And I began to feel bad for her because she made a lot of comments that were actually false, and the evidence is going to prove her false. And I said, "Deb," I said, "you have 30 seconds. Go ahead and finish up," because my audience was getting kind of antsy. And, finish up. And so she did. She was very gracious. She finished up. I said, "Deb, how many manuscripts are there for the New Testament?" She said, "Not very many." I said, 100? 50? 20? She said, "Well, I don't know." She said, "But not very many." I said, "Not very many." I said, "Actually, there's 24,970 manuscripts for the New Testament, which means if you do the statistical analysis, standard deviation, you actually have we have a 98.6% confidence level that what we have in our hand with the New Testament is what was actually originally written. And the variances are often changes in spelling or punctuation or duplications of words or phrases, because, if you're copying by candlelight, and it's about 3 in the morning, you haven't had sleep for 12 hours, you might forget where you were in the text and the place, you might recopy things. And so nothing is in question with the New Testament as far as any point of doctrine. When I debated Jamal Badawi, and you can listen to this on YouTube, he says the same thing. Jesus never claimed to be God. I beg to differ in the strongest way possible, as gently as I can. That's just quite frankly not true. Jesus said, "I and the Father are one." Jesus was crucified on a cross, not for robbing the 7-Eleven store or leaving the gas station without paying for gas. Jesus was crucified for who he claimed to be. That is the charge against him put on his cross, the King of the Jews. His crime was who he claimed to be, not something that he did, but rather for who he claimed to be. Little historic tidbit for the audience. Muslims actually do not believe that Jesus ever died, and they do not believe that Jesus was ever crucified on a cross. I have a book with me today called The Historical Jesus. It has 28 secular sources from historians from the 1st century, most of which are antagonistic and against Christianity. Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, Josephus, Tacitus, all of whom did not like Christians, some of which actually murdered Christians for a pastime. They record that Jesus was crucified on a cross. They record that Jesus claimed to be God. They record that the disciples worshiped Jesus as God. So I submit for your consideration, based upon Jesus' crime, the disciples' testimony, secular history, the entirety of the New Testament, Jesus clearly claimed to be God. There is no question about it. And anybody that takes a cursory look at the New Testament, even if they don't believe it, the New Testament writers clearly claimed that Jesus was God. Another question. Good. First name?
I'm Mark. You were talking a little bit about infinite regress and the beginning of the universe, how the universe had a beginning, therefore there could be something to create that beginning. I was wondering, beyond the fact that, it's a pretty strong fact, that we do not see or tend to see infinite regresses in our everyday life experience, what is the argument to the effect that there could not have been an infinite regress and there must have been something for that initial cause?
Good question. So, infinite regress. David Hilbert is a German mathematician. He wrote a little paper, position paper, on this issue of infinities, and it's called Hilbert's Hotel. And he talks about, let's assume this hotel has an infinite number of rooms in it, and all the rooms are filled. But a person comes into the hotel and says, I haven't been able to find a place to stay tonight. I would like a room. But all the rooms are filled. But the proprietor, the manager, says, no problem. He bumps person in room 1 into room 2, 2 into 3, 3 into 4, 4 into 5, and all the way up to infinity, and he opens up a room for that person, even though the hotel was totally full. And then the next day, an infinite number of people check out of the hotel. People in rooms 1, 3, 5, 7, all the odd numbers. And but that doesn't, you don't want a hotel half full because it loses money. So he bumps people in from all the way down, bumps them from room 2 into room 1, 3 into 2, 4 into 3. He bumps them all the way back down ad infinitum, and now he fills his entire hotel up again. Even though an infinite number of people checked out, there's no less people in that hotel. And Hilbert continues to do these mathematical gymnastics, and he says the end result is that it's absurd. Actual infinities don't exist. And if they did exist, it would be impossible to transverse or cross an actual infinity. Up until fairly recently, about 30 years ago, scientists were still postulating the possibility that the universe was eternal, that it's always existed. That's impossible. If the universe was composed of an infinite number of past events, we could never reach today's event, which is today. Now, humans don't get that rendition, so I'll give it to you another way and you'll get it. I want you to count to negative infinity for me. After negative 3, you can drop the negative sign because it just takes too much energy. Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I want you to count to negative infinity for me. When you get to negative infinity, I want you to turn around and come back down towards 0. How long will it take for you to do the task? My students will say to me, well, a long time. False. Infinite number of times. False answer. In fact, no matter how long, fast, and hard you count, you will never get any closer to the task than when you first started, because you can never reach negative infinity. In fact, you can never even get close to negative infinity. So if the past were a negative infinity of events, you could never get to the present, which would be the 0 event. It's impossible. So philosophers agree with David Hilbert that actual infinities don't exist. They're simply mathematical concepts that are helpful for manipulating certain equations, kind of like I, the square root of negative 1. Well, there is no square root of negative 1, so we invent an imaginary number called I because it's helpful when we do mathematical calculations. But it doesn't have any actual reality in the real world. It's simply a concept. Where's my MC? So he's got a couple of closing comments. I think we're out of microphone or amplification time, or close to it, but I will stick around. I'll answer questions till forever.
Cool. So right now it's 11:45, and I know some of you guys have classes to go to, but if you guys have any questions that didn't get answers, or if you don't want to talk in the mic, we have a number to text, which is 85005, and text Stump the Professor. That is one word, to 85005. And yeah, text that to us, and there'll be a survey to quickly fill out, and send your questions, and one of us will get back to you. But we do have 15 more minutes to have Jon just answer questions. But we have to turn off the mic at 1. And yeah, but he'll be sticking around till after 1 if you guys have more questions. So here's Jon again.
Oh, okay, good. Oh, we got more time, lots more time. More questions.
My friends wanted to ask, what's the purpose of following religion besides just having good morals, and like why go to church and waste time going to church? I mean, you could just spend that time serving someone, or like, what's the point?
With Christianity, Christianity is about a relationship. Although Christianity has great moral structure and virtue to it. Gandhi, the great Hindu leader, acknowledged the greatness of Jesus. He said, I like your Jesus, I just don't like your Christians, which, you know, it's kind of sad. But Christianity is about a relationship with God. And once you come into a relationship, kind of like a marriage relationship. Guys, when you marry your wife, you don't say to her, sweetheart, I'll be home once a week so we can, you know, kind of get intimate, but, you know, I don't want to see you the rest of the week. That's not what she signed up for. She wants all of you. She wants to spend a lot of time with you. She wants this relationship to grow and develop and be more intimate emotionally and socially and in friendship. And there's certain ways that you can build any relationship. Same thing true with Christianity. So if we hang around with the same people that believe similar to us, that can help us grow in this relationship, whether that's, you know, chess club or sailing club or, you know, Christian club. Hanging out with people that share those same interests can actually help make us grow and encourage us. Thanks for your bravery.
Thanks. I had a question on how you were saying that there's no such thing as infinity, actual infinity.
I said there isn't.
There is no such thing as an actual infinity. So what is the smallest measurement of anything?
Smallest measurement of?
Of just mass, distance. Like, what would you say would be the smallest? Wouldn't it be an infinite? Wouldn't there be an infinite smallest? Anything?
No, I don't think so. It's kind of like the old argument, I forget who proposed this, like if you have a line, they use this illustration of walking half the distance to the doorway. So let's say the doorway is where my bottle is. Maybe I better put it closer because my mic won't go that far. So they'll say, this mathematical illustration, I can walk halfway to the distance to the doorway. Then I can walk halfway. Then I can walk halfway. Then I can walk halfway. And I can do that an infinite number of times. So there's an infinite number of segments between me and the doorway. That's actually false because I'll demonstrate. I just walk past the doorway. So I can actually traverse the doorway. So again, this is simply a mathematical concept. You couldn't walk halfway, halfway, halfway an infinite number of times. So there is, you know, you will approach zero, and at one point you're going to hit zero. So zero would say be the doorway. Well, I hit zero, now I'm in the other direction. So there isn't actual infinities. There's potential infinities. There's potential infinities. I believe that you and I are composed of not simply a physical substance, but also a soul. And our soul will live for all of eternity. So we are actually potential infinities. So let's assume that the Christian motif of heaven and hell is actually accurate, just for assumption's sake. When we are in heaven, and we say to one another, we say, hey, how old are you? Well, I'm 150,000 years, 6 months, 3 weeks, 4 days, 5 hours, 17 minutes, and 13 seconds. We will always be able to quantify how old we are, but we'll always exist, and we'll always be able to add years, months, and decades to our life. So it will always be quantifiable, but it will never be ended as far as duration. That's called a potential infinity. But it's always quantifiable, and you can add to it. Do you have a question? Go ahead.
My question is it possible to come to the same
moral conclusions as religion without using religions as in, like using science as saying, statistically, if I hurt somebody else, it's going to negatively affect me in return, or something like that? Is it possible to completely remove religion from the topic of morals and still live a moral lifestyle?
What's your first name?
Matthew.
Matthew. I want to say a limited yes, but if I was pushed, I'd have to say no. So, are there things that we can observe about society? You probably wouldn't like it if I killed you, right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't like it if you killed me. I want to continue life, you want to continue life. So we make an agreement and say, hey, you don't kill me, I won't kill you, okay? And we say, okay, that sounds good. So, that's a good deal, but that situation may not be moral, but it may be pragmatically expedient. It preserves your life and preserves my life. So I don't think we have a logical foundation for living life morally if there is not a God that does not exist. If we're just an accident in the universe, we might agree on some social norms so we can have a little bit nicer society and we're not running over each other and crossing the center line when we drive cars and poisoning everybody's food because we like to see people gag and die. So, but that's all social kind of norms, but it's not right or wrong. I mean, I would be more happy in that universe if people aren't running me over or poisoning me to death. But you cannot get morals from science or molecules or from grass or government or social consensus. They have to be grounded. They have to exist someplace. And they don't exist simply because we take a voice vote and say, okay, it's not okay to run old ladies to cross the street or run them over when they cross the street. So we do need religion. Specifically, we need God in the picture to give us a moral structure. So there's a book by this title. It says, Can Man Be Good Without God? That's a book title. It's by Alistair McGrath, who actually used to be an atheist. Then through examining some evidence, he actually committed his life to Christ, became a Christian. And he answers this question. He says, can man really be good without God? And his answer is, no, we can't. In fact, if there is no God, there is no such thing as good. There is no.
How do you say that one?
If there is no God, there is no such thing as good.
What good concepts can you tell me that can't be derived in another way other than saying God said it? Like, is there any specific examples of something that's only good because God said it? It's not good because of the social structure and the way we communicate with each other and deal with each other. Is there any specific examples that
I'm not sure I understand. Maybe fly it by me one more time.
You're saying that there is no good without God. What specifically isn't good without God?
What isn't good without God? Well, if there's not an ultimate absolute, then there is no source of goodness. It doesn't exist. So if I say, well, why is it wrong to murder people? Why is it wrong to murder people?
Because life is all that there is. So if you were to murder somebody, with a religious context, if you were to
say a non-religious context.
A non-religious context is it's wrong to murder somebody because that completely ends their life. There's only this life, so you have to preserve this life even more and take care of each other while you're living this life. But with religion, it's okay to murder them because they'll go to heaven and their life will continue.
Yeah, it's not okay to murder because they're going to heaven.
It's not the people themselves, not the murderer, but the person themselves. You could say they're in a better place now. But if there is no heaven, this is the better place.
Or the only place. Yeah. 4 years ago, thank you, Matthew. 4 years ago or 5 years ago when I was debating the atheists, one of the questions from the audience kind of came up with Matthew's question about this whole issue of right and wrong and ethics. And one of the students said, well, how do we determine right or wrong? And DJ, my debate partner there, said, well, it's based upon consequences. Now, he's an atheist. And he's actually, atheists are frantically trying to write ethics books. And so he said, well, consequences. And I challenged him on it. I said, well, let's say that you have a brand new $80,000 Beamer, BMW car, and my car is ready to, give up the ghost and die. And so I want to acquire your car. So I load up my 9mm semi-automatic Glock, and I put 2 bullets in the chamber, and I put those bullets through your head. You're dead. You don't need the car anymore. So I'm going to take your car keys, and I acquire an 80,000 BMW for the price of about 45 cents, 2 bullets. I said, the consequences of that action are extremely good for me. So therefore, I guess, based upon your ethics strategy, consequentialism, that action of me killing you is actually good. He said, no, it's not, because it doesn't have good consequences for me, John. I said, so, question. What happens when the consequences between you and me conflict? Good consequences for me, bad consequences for you. How do you deliberate? How do you adjudicate, decide, judge whether or not the decision is ethical or not? He went flatline, no brain activity. No response. Why? He has no authority structure beyond humankind and society to actually make a judgment about whether or not this decision is right or wrong. There's nothing above society. So what happens when one society conflicts with another society? You load your guns really fast, and you better shoot first, because there's no objective standard above society by which to appeal to this conflict. That's why we have wars. That's why we have so much conflict in the world. One society says we make the rules, the other societies say we make the rules, but the rules conflict between those societies. We need somebody above all culture, and by theoretically, above all culture is God only. We got to close the mic in about 30 seconds here.
Just on that one topic of wars, how many wars are related to non-religion, where
about 99.99999%.
As in, they don't believe my religion, or these people don't believe in any religion?
No, it'd be more, I'm thinking in the terms of what wars have existed in the world that have been largely motivated by religious beliefs and conflict between religious people. So the Inquisition, the Crusades, the Counter-Crusades, and the 30-Year War in Europe. Those are the only 3. All the rest of the wars weren't really religiously motivated. Maybe the individual participants had religious beliefs, but that's not what they were fighting about. They were fighting about land or geography or oil or whatever and stuff. So we got to close, but come on up if you have more questions. Thank you for coming out. Stay around. We can ask some more questions, but I got to give up the mic.
Yeah. Well, once again, if you guys have any questions that you guys didn't get to answer and you have to go to class, text Stump the Professor to 85005. Also, if you want to get more information about crew, text more info crew, that is one word, more info crew to 85005, and we'll follow up with you. If you guys, we're going to have to turn off the mic in a little bit, but feel free to stick around. John will be here to answer any of your questions. Cool. Thanks.